The common language used by a country is greatly exaggerated and has become a myth. It was presented as the sole determinant of culture. Yes, it's a powerful determinant, but different qualities of life create different forms of togetherness. From Zygmunt Bauman's sociological perspective, the concept of common national language, which is one of the cornerstones of the nation-state project constructed during the solid period of modernity, is based not on historical reality, but on a construction and invention. According to Bauman, the nation-state is the product of an effort to create a homogeneous community. In his book, Liquid Modernity, published in 2000, he shows that the modern state uses linguistic homogeneity as a tool to sharpen the boundary between us and the other. However, this homogeneity is not so much a historical reality as it is an important part of the security project of capitalism in the service of the rulers. Bauman deepens Benedict Anderson's conceptualization of the imagined community to show this. The nation-state's common language is actually an artificial standard woven over multilingualism and dialect diversity. A network woven through schools, media, and official language projects. The 19th century nationalism projects hid the fact that the people didn't actually speak a homogeneous language, but rather lived among various dialects and local speech forms. So, what does all this have to do with food? The same effort doesn't work at the table in an official manner as it does in language. The table and food culture reveal class distinctions and transnational transitions. Particularly observing street stalls within this framework brings out a completely different structural network behind the image. When we eat at a street stall, we often think we are simply filling our stomachs. Yet, street food is one of the most powerful areas we can look at to understand a society's economic structure, class relations, labor forms, and history. Because food doesn't emerge only in the kitchen. How the people who produce it live, within which economic relations they work, under what conditions which products are produced, and for whom, and how the food is prepared are all part of that food itself. When we look at street food in Vietnam, Thailand, and Laos, we encounter three different economic and social relation forms within the same geographical region. The streets of these three countries shows us how capitalism operates not only in factories and large corporations, but also in the most ordinary moments of daily life, in a bowl of noodles, in a wok pan, or inside a basket of rice. Street stalls are the spilling over of kitchens trapped within four walls onto the streets. It's their reproduction with a new economy and class relations.
For you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
We must begin with the informal economy. According to the International Labour Organization's 2018 report, Women and Men in the Informal Economy, a statistical picture, in developing countries more than 60% of employment occurs in the informal economy. That is the economy that doesn't enter the records, that is not seen in official ledgers. In Southeast Asia, this rate rises above 70% in Vietnam, despite more records being kept. In other words, the street stalls we see here are not small and insignificant business standing on the margins of the economy. They are part of a huge economic area where millions of people earn their livelihood. Because they are unregistered, they are not given much importance, but in fact, they represent serious economic agency. The fundamental contradiction of this area is this. People work within the economic system, but most of the time they remain outside the legal and social protections provided by this system. The street vendor works, produces, sells, and adds value to the economy, yet may not have a regular employment contract, social security or job security, especially in non-communist Thailand.
Your spice is very hard. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye bye.
Therefore, the street stall is not a romantic area remaining outside of capitalism. It is one of the informal and insecurely organized pieces of the capitalist economy. In Vietnam, this changed somewhat. The communist state provides more security compared to others. Street stalls are like a meeting point of classes: laborers, farmers, workers with the rulers, or the white-collar workers of the rulers. They come together briefly in front of stalls on the street. The common language they speak develops the illusion that they are the same. In fact, the common language becomes the illusion of those who have nothing in common.
Come on, Rodney.
With wine or tea to help our health.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
How can they make tea with this?
Với trà thì là mình cắt xong rồi mình
Dạ đúng rồi, mình cắt mình rửa đi xong rồi mình đun lên.
This illusion is produced by official history and guided consciousnesses. Of course, no one is even aware of this. The system is the same in all nation states. Common ancestors, common myths, and common idols. The meeting at street stalls has nothing to do with these illusions. It has to do with one drive: hunger. At this point, looking at Pierre Bourdieu's analysis of class and culture can be illuminating. Bourdieu shows in his 1979 work La Distinction that tastes, pleasures, and consumption preferences are not independent of social classes. Taste is class-based. It is produced with the individual's inner atmosphere. What we eat, where we eat, and which food we find valuable is related to the economic and cultural capital we possess. However, an interesting situation emerges in the streets of these countries. People from different classes can eat the same food in front of the same stall. Because the fast-paced life practices of capitalism push people to these streets. Beyond being interesting places for tourists, they are an important element for a city's speed-based lifestyle. In all three countries, family togetherness is important. The street doesn't harm this togetherness. On the contrary, it develops togetherness. Of course, what I have said doesn't mean that class differences have disappeared. On the contrary, when we look with Bourdieu's approach, we can see that class differences are sometimes reproduced even within the same consumption practice. For a white-collar worker, street food is an authentic experience. For a Western tourist, it's also an authentic and interesting experience. They take its photo, post it on Instagram, and by sharing their experience, show their earnings to those around them.
Dạ, quanh đây giờ đi mà đi xa, phải đi xe, chứ đi bộ. Nhưng mà người ta bán buổi sáng.
They make this experience a part of their cultural capital. Yet, for the laborer who prepares that same food, that same stall is the area of livelihood they have to work at every day. What one buys and adds to their cultural capital through tourism is the other's labor and life. The same plate doesn't mean the same thing for two groups. This is class. The worker at that stall cannot go to another country and develop their cultural capital. To express it with Bourdieu's concept of habitus, people's approach to food is shaped by the class positions they are in. Therefore, street food doesn't eliminate classes. It confronts different classes in the same consumption area and makes these differences more visible. However, seeing is related to the level of knowledge. Seeing is reading. Reading texts and life experiences also bring the skill of reading the street. Infinite reading is impossible, but one expands a little more toward infinity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Tambit. Bye bye. Bye bye. Hello. Hello. Hello.
To understand this class relationship in Asia, we can also look at Judith Ehlert's 2021 study, Food Consumption, Habitus and the Embodiment of Social Change in Urban Vietnam. Ehlert's study takes food consumption as a file to understand the relationships between class, habitus, and social change. Particularly among urban middle classes, new consumption forms oriented toward health, diet, fresh vegetables, and less fatty proteins are not merely individual preferences. They are also indicators of changing social positions and new middle class habitus. Diet, fresh vegetables, and healthy food have become an important myth for these classes. Of course, the market economy exploits this myth to the end. In contrast, at the street stall, especially in the early hours of the morning, we encounter a different world of labor. Here, food is often not a lifestyle choice, but a daily form of nutrition needed to be able to work. The person at the stall at 4 in the morning has either just come off the night shift or is preparing for the first shift of the day. Therefore, even the hour, place, and form in which the food is consumed can be associated with social class. For middle and upper classes and tourists coming to the country, the authentic, mystical, and somewhat dirty lifestyle is excellent material for egos inflated on social media and the "I am different" attitude. An important portion of these vendors in Asia are laborers who have migrated from rural areas to cities, don't have land ownership, and remain outside formal employment. Therefore, seeing the street stall merely as a small entrepreneurship story falls short. What is at issue here is people's effort to carve out a livelihood for themselves within the inequalities created by the market economy worldwide. It is the effort to survive in city spaces established by the changed neo-colonialism form of the colonialism of capital states. Behind these stalls are lives that prove the lie they call democracy is actually a form of modern barbarism and neo-colonialism. The street vendor is at once both a laborer and actor struggling to sustain their own small economic activity. At the same time, these people can be left outside the system yet also work within the system. Vietnam provides a more positive perspective compared to other countries and protects these people. Street stalls belong only to Vietnamese citizens, and tax regulation are arranged in their favor. They are more registered. However, still in the city atmosphere produced by the neoliberal market, they have to work for hours just like other Asian countries. Therefore, these stalls are not seen in London, Paris, New York, or Moscow, because neoliberal imperialism enriches its own geography more, just as in colonial times. Now let us move from this point to the food itself. In Vietnam, pho is one of the most important examples where this relationship can be read historically. Sidney Mintz, in his 1985 work Sweetness and Power, The Place of Sugar in Modern History, while examining this examining the history of sugar shows how the production and consumption forms of foods are connected with colonialism, labor, and the capitalist world economy. One of Mint's main contributions is showing that the meaning and social position of a food can change throughout history. When we look at pho in Vietnam, we cannot think of the food's history independently of colonialism and labor relations. While the techniques in rice noodle production are associated with Chinese immigrant workers during the French colonial period, the section of beef parts considered elite in French cuisine and the utilization of remaining bones, offal, and lower valued parts in local kitchens helps us understand the historical context of today's pho. Thus, ingredients that were low valued in the past have transformed over time into one of the strongest symbols of Vietnamese cuisine. Pho was the garbage of French colonizers' wealth. Pho is not merely a simple food of the Vietnamese people. It is a product of colonialism, economic relations, labor, and the historical transformation of local cuisine. It is a magnificent food produced from the garbage of imperialism, and it's a true symbol of Vietnamese socialist independence, of a nation's success.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Men à?
Men.
Trang đấy, trang đấy.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
What is important here is being able to see that a form of political administration has become life itself. Many things we call individual are actually highly political. The political can develop or destroy humanity. The terrible conditions of Sharia regimes or the capitalism and market economy in underdeveloped countries demonstrate this. Colonialism also affects what people produce, what they consume, and which materials are considered valuable. Hierarchies form within a cuisine. Which meat is valuable, which part is considered waste, which food goes to whose table is not determined by taste alone. Behind this are class and historical relations. This is why when we look at a bowl of pho on the streets of Vietnam, we can read not only a traditional food but also the historical traces of colonial past and social transformation. When we move to Thailand, another form of relationship emerges. Jack Goody, in his 1982 work Cooking, Cuisine and Class, a study in comparative sociology, compares food cultures in terms of class and social differentiation. One of Goody's main questions is why differentiated palace cuisines belonging to elites emerged in some societies. In some societies, this distinction takes different forms. Thailand's culinary history offers an important example for this discussion in terms of the relationship between palace cuisine and folk cuisine. The rapid cooking techniques we see on the street today, especially wok usage, food being prepared in a very short time and intense fire are the reshaped forms of historical culinary traditions within modern street economy. Not the same as in history, but reproduction according to the market economy. Here we see how the same culinary culture can emerge in different forms in different class and economic areas. In palace cuisine, a dish is prepared with long time and aesthetic details. On the streets of Thailand, speed, cheapness, and low quality spices come to the fore. Thus, the same culinary tradition lives in different forms within different classes and different economic conditions. Separate for rulers, separate for the people. This is seen in a class societies. Reading Thai street food only through local culinary history is also not sufficient. The food regime approach developed by Philip McMichael in his 2009 article A Food Regime Genealogy comes into play here. According to McMichael, food production and consumption cannot be thought independently of capitalism's global economic and ecological relations. The food regime is a global politic process. A dish prepared in a few minutes at a street stall can actually be connected to production processes in very different parts of the world. Shrimp may come from an industrial aquaculture farm. Chicken may be part of industrial production systems. Vegetables may come from agricultural production areas where low-paid and insecure workers work. Therefore, the stall on the street is one of the final links of the global food regime. We only see the wok and the fire, but behind that food is a much longer production chain.
Eski Bangkok, hello. Cup chai.
The question is this: in northern rural Laos, is that shrimp collected from the river, or does it come from industrial farms? Thai cuisine's opening to the global market makes this process even more visible. The Thai government's Kitchen of the World project, launched in 2002, was a gastro-diplomacy initiative aimed at promoting Thai cuisine on a global scale. Here, food is no longer just a local consumption object. It is not products coming from forests or rivers. At the same time, it becomes the country's cultural brand and an element of the tourism economy and a product of the global market. Food is a meta working for the country's rulers. In this process, local cuisine is reorganized for the global consumer. It can be made more standardized, adapt to different palates, and made sellable in the international market. Thus, a direct relationship is established between local cuisine and global capitalism. A country's culture is not only a heritage to be protected, but also a product that can be transformed into economic value for capitalists through nation-state policies. When we bring Bourdieu's class and taste analysis back here, we see that this transformation in Thailand is not only economic, because what taste is considered good, which smell is heavy, which spice is too much, or which dish is authentic can also be determined class-wise and culturally. The real determinant is the consumer. What is ordinary for the local people must become an exotic or authentic experience for the tourists. Authenticity is an important value circulating within the market. Not reality, but an authentic illusion must be consumed. While consuming the authentic illusion, films and Instagram posts come into play. These are the scripts of a large economy. The desires of people who enter into it turn this capitalist economy. Global tourism does not only consume local culture, it reshapes it. Thus, what was once the daily food of a certain social group is transformed into a product that can be sold in the international market, adding color to the consumer's individual life and cultural capital.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
When we come to Laos, we encounter a different economic relation form. One of the points that makes Laos special in my eyes is this. Here, sticky rice is not only a food but also one of the important elements of social life. Human relations relatively far from the influence of global markets. Penny One Asterix 2000 study, Materializing Thailand is an important reference for understanding the region's food culture and how social relations have been transformed into commodities and products. The central position of sticky rice in Laotian food culture helps us understand the function of food in establishing social bonds, and this is not a touristic product of global market relations. Eating the same food together, touching the food with hands, and consuming it together strengthens the bond between food and social relation. Émile Durkheim, in his 1893 work De la division du travail social, that is, on the division of labor in society, discusses how societies are held together and the different forms of solidarity. When we think of Laotian food culture within this framework, we can see that food is not only an individual consumption object, but also plays a role in establishing social bonds. From this perspective, the sticky rice culture in Laos is still an example of the capacity of food sharing to create social relations. Because some local economic relations in Laos are not as intensely integrated into global capitalist food chains as in Vietnam or Thailand. The distance between producer and consumer is shorter. The producer can also be the seller, and the seller can also be the consumer, and social relations are less capitalized. Non-monetary exchange forms such as barter can also be seen within local markets. This situation doesn't mean that Laos is a completely separate and pure economic world outside of capitalism. Do not understand it this way here. Of course, Laos is not independent of capitalist relations. However, it can be seen that there are economic relations where the market has not yet determined all areas of life with the same intensity. Not all of life has been colonized by the system. There are still relatively independent areas. The World Bank's 2014 Low PDR Rice Policy Study report states that 59% of agricultural production in Laos is subsistence production. That is, an important portion of production is carried out not directly for the market but to meet people's own needs. At this point, the following question can be asked. Should an economic structure not fully integrated into market relations be seen only as underdevelopment? Or is this, albeit unintentionally, creating a distance against the capitalist food regime's tendency to commodify everything, a reflex to protect culture? Subsistence production coexisting with poverty and insecurity, but is this truly poverty? What does it measure those who see this lifestyle as poor? An economic relation form where production and consumption are not completely separated from each other through the market reminds us of a world we have forgotten. The areas we read as poor carry the riches of another way of life. When we try to compare three different street stall economies in Vietnam, Thailand and Laos, in Vietnam, the street stall is an area where migration from rural to urban areas, informal labor and social transformation intersect. Alleys feed street stalls. These alleys called are often intertwined with street stalls. The seller here is both a laborer and a small economic actor trying to earn their own livelihood. Although intertwined with the system in terms of money and taxes, they are relatively free. They are their own bosses. In Thailand, however, the street stall is a production and consumption area more strongly connected to the global food regime and tourism economy due to the country's touristic nature. Speed, standardization, global supply chains, and the commodification of culture become more prominent here. Authenticity and locality are established here in a more conscious and artificial manner. The Thai street stall owner is a more visible actor of the global economy. When we come to Laos, local production, subsistence agriculture, and the shorter distance between producer and consumer create an economic area where market relations have not yet determined all areas of life to the same extent. That is, Laos is the most natural and least marketized of these. Vietnam is a system established with stronger rules and state protection of sellers. Thailand is a more touristic and relatively more artificial environment.
Thank you.
Difference.
sweet corn sweet potato
Ah, sweet potato.
onion taro pumpkin
Uh-huh. When comparing these three countries, Bourdieu's concept of social field can provide us with an important framework. It is more correct to read the style in Vietnam not as a transition area, but as an area where social and economic transformations intersect. Socio-political and historical changes are layered. Here there is not a simple rupture between the state's socialist past and the development of market relations, but Vietnam's own unique social transformation. Capitalism didn't win in Vietnam. The majority who cannot read society think so. A different model has emerged in Vietnam: capitalist integration under socialist state control. It has a history extending back to the NEP policies in the Soviet Union. If you don't know this, you can't read. But I will not enter this topic. Let us continue without dispersing the subject. The point dominating property relations is still not firms in Vietnam. The stall owner both sells their labor and runs their own small economic activity and is much more under state protection compared to others. The stall in Thailand is an area where global economic integration is more visible. While the cook stands at the final link of global supply chains, they also carry the risks of flexible and insecure work. Thailand's street stall owner is a much more visible actor of the global economy. The stall in Laos, on the other hand, doesn't have to be an active political opposition area, but it is an area showing the existence of economic practices not fully surrendered to market relations. The country's mountainous structure and landlocked area also affect this. When we apply Sidney Mint's approach, which helps us think about the relationship between food, labor, and imperialism to these three countries, we can also see the differences. In Vietnam, food carries traces of colonial past and social transformation. In Thailand, local cuisine is reorganized within global tourism and market relations and transformed into an international cultural commodity in Laos. In Laos, the existence of subsistence production and local economic relations shows that the industrial food system has not yet determined every area to the same extent. The production in Laos is more real and more local. All this tells us street food is not an innocent area standing outside of capitalism. But it's also not an area where capitalism has completely homogenized everything. On the contrary, street stalls are areas where the capitalist economy operates in different forms, encounters local cultures, transforms labor forms, and sometimes comes side by side with economic relations remaining outside itself. These products area sometimes an authentic market product and sometimes products directly connected to the local. Therefore, the right way to look at street food is perhaps this: to examine without romanticizing the food, but also without making the labor behind it invisible. Because what we see at a street stall is not only a culinary tradition. It's also the result of an economic order, a class relation, a historical process, and the livelihood struggle of millions of people. In the end, street food does not tell us a single story. It tells many stories at the same time. It tells the laborer's story, the migrant's story, the farmer's story, the small vendor's story, the tourist's story who increases their cultural capital by showing it to their friends, and the struggles of global economy rulers who connect all of these to each other. This is in fact a system story, just like the Matrix movie.